What do Christopher Columbus, John Wesley, Stanley Ann Dunham, and Anne Frank all have in common? They're all Mormons. Sort of. The LDS practice of posthumous baptisms, known as baptism for the dead, is part of the universalist appeal of Mormonism. The logic goes that if one dies without entering into the salvific covenants of Mormonism, one can enter those covenants after death through a proxy. A member of the church will make the covenants physically for and in behalf of the deceased individual. This will allow them to accept or reject the covenant in their spiritual state awaiting resurrection. This is the official position of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I myself have participated countless times in all of these proxy ordinances for the dead, both as an officiator and as the proxy. All that is to say, I am not making this up. And as mentioned, this proxy baptism has been done for people like Christopher Columbus and John Wesley by Wilford Woodruff in the St. George Temple, but also it's been done for more contemporary figures, such as former President Barack Obama's mother. Now on Easter Monday 2025, Pope Francis passed away at the age of 88. Some Mormons have already taken to the internet to say things like, how wild must it be to be a pope and then discover in the spirit world that Christ's church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And indeed, according to LDS theology, the Pope will spend at least the next 24 days being taught the gospel in spirit prison, as someone who did not come to the fullness of the gospel in his mortal life. One has to be dead for at least 30 days before any proxy ordinances can take place, and even then the request should be submitted by an immediate family member or with the permission of an immediate family member. If not, the person only becomes free game after 110 years. However, any member could, and I stress could, submit the Pope's name for proxy temple ordinances after just 24 days. This is because, as far as I can ascertain, the only barrier to submission of a name for temple work is a self-declaration on the website to say that you have permission. You're not required to submit any proof of permission. And if you think about it, many members of the church in the USA, when they want to remove their names from the records of the church, have to go to a notary, because the church wants to safeguard against fraudulent resignations. But interestingly, the church hasn't taken the same steps to prevent fraudulent admissions through posthumous baptism, even though such fraudulent posthumous admissions have caused deep pain amongst some communities. To try and calm the outcry against such baptisms, the church has stated its position publicly. The offering of baptism to our deceased ancestors is a sacred practice to us, and it is counter to church policy for a church member to submit names for baptism for persons to whom they are not related. That's what the church says publicly. But according to the church handbook, the church's position seems a bit more open to self-justification that may lead to non-relatives submitting names without permission. It has some strong parts. Generally, church members should not submit names to family search from the following groups: famous people, names gathered from unapproved extraction projects, Jewish Holocaust victims. This seems to line up with the publicly stated caveat to the general rule, that is, if you're a direct relative, then you can go ahead. However, the church says in the section of the handbook before the one we just read, when submitting names for proxy temple ordinances, members should generally submit only the names of persons to whom they are related. Should generally could provide a lot of wiggle room for overzealous members. Perhaps they feel the Spirit has prompted them deeply to submit the name of a non-relative, or they claim personal revelation that in this instance, this deceased individual appeared to them in a vision asking for baptism, as Wilford Woodruff claimed about the founding fathers of America, along with people such as Christopher Columbus and John Wesley. All this in combination with the fact that the only barrier to submission of a non-relative is you click a declaration saying you have permission, means we end up with a far from perfect system for regulating the submission of names. And in light of the penchant Mormons clearly have for baptizing the famous dead, it's hardly surprising that large groups of dead individuals also attract the attention of those keen to do posthumous missionary work for the church. Victims of the Holocaust have been baptized in this way in large numbers to the outrage of the Jewish community. There is a reason that Holocaust victims are explicitly mentioned in the handbook. In 1995, Jewish and LDS church leaders signed an agreement that Mormons, when forwarding names for temple baptisms, could only enter the names of Holocaust victims to whom they were directly related. The church also agreed to remove the names, some 260,000, of Holocaust victims already entered into the church's genealogical database. Another 43,000 names of Holocaust victims were later removed, nearly all identified by the church, which now flags any identifiable names of Holocaust victims in its database with the designation not available for temple ordinances. But unfortunately, this hasn't stopped the submission of names for proxy baptism of Holocaust victims by non-relatives. The most recent time that Anne Frank was baptized in this way, that we know of, was in 2012, some 17 years after the 1995 agreement. It seems she's managed to be baptized at least 9 times. The inability of church leadership to stop this behaviour amongst amongst its members has led to deep frustrations and hurt in the Jewish community, with one Jewish genealogist saying, "We want to say this to all well-meaning Christians. We don't want to be saved, redeemed, forgiven, reincarnated, resurrected, or enraptured. We just want to be left alone." After 2,000 years, is it so much to ask? We find the idea of Jews being posthumously baptized into the Mormon Church to be deeply offensive in the extreme, and cannot express our disgust, outrage, and revulsion at this practice in strong enough terms. If everyone has free will, or free agency as Mormons say it, why bother with baptizing the dead who choose not to accept Christ? It takes the spiritual hounding of Jews to new lows. Not even the grave is a refuge from overzealous missionaries. This is what was said when D. Todd Christofferson was confronted about further breaches of the 1995 agreement in 2003. It was not the Church's responsibility to monitor the archives to ensure that no new Jewish names appear. We never had in mind that we would, on a continual basis, go in and ferret out the Jewish names, Mr. Christofferson said, adding that the labour involved in constantly sifting through an ever-expanding archive, which contains more than 400 million names, would represent an intolerable burden. When the Church is made aware of documented concerns, action is taken in compliance with the agreement. Now, apart from the fact that go in and ferret out the Jewish names really doesn't sound good, D. Todd Christofferson may be right that it isn't the Church's responsibility under the 1995 agreement to continually monitor the genealogical archive that is used to submit names for temple work. The New York Times article goes on to state that some Jewish genealogists agree with the Church's interpretation of the agreement. But what the Church absolutely could do is make it harder for the names of Holocaust victims, as well as celebrities and other targets of this kind of overzealous behaviour, to have their names submitted for temple work. They could absolutely make it a requirement that some kind of evidence is submitted and reviewed before the name is submitted for an ordinance. And in the case of Holocaust victims, this sort of system seems to be in place now. But as far as I can tell, this process does not apply outside of Holocaust victims. So until they apply a high standard of evidence to all non-relative requests, the fact that I can't imagine any member of the Pope's family giving consent for his temple work to be done wouldn't prevent anyone from simply claiming to have that permission. So therefore, with no guarantee evidence will be requested, in just 24 days' time, Pope Francis may be baptized by proxy in a Mormon temple somewhere, without the consent of his sister Maria, and likely to the outrage of millions of Catholics worldwide if the news got out.